You may know the story of Carl and Ellie Fredrickson. A lot of people know the story. In fact, it may be your story. Carl and Ellie met when they were very young. They were exploring and found one another. And they were intrigued by the same things. They had a passion for life, and they wanted to live lives of adventure. And they would go to the movies together. And during the movies, they would watch the newsreels. For you young people, you don't know what that is. We oldie goldies know what that is. But before the movies, in the old days, instead of showing commercials, they would show newsreels telling you what was happening all over the world. And so Carl and Ellie would sit intrigued by the newsreels, especially when Charles Muntz would appear. Charles Muntz was a great adventurer, and he traveled down to Venezuela. And during those adventures, he would bring back relics. He would bring back fossils of animals that had never been seen before. Carl and Ellie talked among themselves how much one day they wanted to go and do what Charles Muntz had done. Well, critics began to discount what Charles Muntz was saying. They didn't much believe that these fossils that Charles was bringing back were real animals. And so Charles vowed to go back down to these places where he had found the fossils, and he would be able to bring back a living specimen of those fossils that he had found. He was gone for years and years and years. And while he was gone on his adventure to find these living specimens, Carl and Ellie grew up together. And they dated. And they eventually got married. And they bought a dilapidated home and they restored it. And all the time they kept saving their money. They would put their pennies and their nickels and their dimes and their quarters into a gallon jug. And they were saving for the adventure of a lifetime. They wanted to go to a place that no one had ever really stayed before. And so, as they were collecting their money and as they were living life, real life kicked them in the teeth. Flat tires, home repairs, medical bills, and then one day, Ellie found out she was sick. And Ellie died. But Carl wanted to keep the dream alive. And so he did. And one day, he made the great escape. It's a great adventure. And the story I just told you is a movie. It's a Disney movie called Up. And it's not a real story, but it could be a real story for us. It could be a real story for us because we are called as Christians into a great adventure. We are called to jump into the water, to make a commitment to the Lord when He calls us out of the world. He calls us into something greater than we could ever expect to achieve on our own. He calls us to the place that Carl and Ellie knew as Paradise Falls. Well, I hope that you and I would have the courage to step out. But so many times we find ourselves caught up in the adventure we want to live that we don't really get to experience the adventure that God has in store for us. We're so concerned with what we want to do with our lives and where we want to go, that we never even really hear the voice of Jesus saying, "Follow me. I've got the greatest adventure." And I want to share that story with you today too. You see, Jesus didn't just appear one day on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus was born and he lived and he grew up as a little boy, and his name began to be heard in different parts. And one day, though, Jesus was walking and he was preparing for this ministry he would be conducting for 3.5 years. And he went to this place called the Sea of Galilee, and it goes by many other names, but the Sea of Galilee is not really a sea, it's a lake. It's a very large lake. And this is where many people were able to accumulate their living. That's how they made their living, was fishing. And Jesus knew that the people that he would be encountering on this particular day, they were fishermen. And just so you'll know, fishermen were not really looked upon with great favor in those days. Fishermen were not the people who were held in the highest regard. They barely eked out a living. And every day, they did the same thing. If you were really a fisherman, you did the very same thing every day. Every morning, you would wake up and you would go to the place where your nets were and you would check your nets. And if your nets needed repair, you would repair your nets. And then you would fold your nets, and then you would place your nets into your fishing boat, and you would row out to wherever you wanted to go fishing, and you would cast your nets. And then, hopefully, if the fishing was good, you would draw your nets back in, and there would be fish. And then you would row back into shore, and you would clean those fish. And then you would sell some of those fish. And then you would take some of those fish home, and you would prepare those fish for a meal, and you would eat those fish, and you would go to bed, and you would wake up the next morning and do the very same thing over and over and over and over. Life was the same. Maybe you can relate to that story too. Maybe you're one of those people who feels as though you are just marking time, as though your life has no diversity in it, as though you are caught up in a rut. And maybe there is an adventure waiting on you. I want to share with you this beautiful story, and it's found in the book of Matthew. I love the story because it is a story about what faith really is. Listen to these words, Matthew 4, beginning in verse 18. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew, and they were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." At once, they left their nets and they followed him. And going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John. And they were in a boat with their father Zebedee. Preparing their nets, Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father, and they followed him. And Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. And news about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, and those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures and paralyzed, and he healed them. large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. I think this is a beautiful story. Because Jesus, when he encounters these fishermen, he basically says this: follow me. Jump in. Jump into this place where you will experience the living water. You've been fishing in these waters for quite some time, but there's an adventure waiting for you which is greater than anything you've ever known before. Even when you brought in your greatest haul, the life that I have planned for you is better than that. And he says to you and I, come on, follow me, jump in. I want you to experience life as you've never experienced it before. Maybe things are good for you. Maybe you're pretty happy where you're at. Maybe you're even content where you're at right now. But Jesus says, come follow me. I've got something better for you. There's something awaiting you that you can never even imagine unless you're willing to jump in, unless you're willing to take that first step to follow me. Little boy was telling his father a riddle. He looked up at his dad and he said, Dad, there were 3 frogs that were on a limb hanging over a pool, and one of the frogs decided to jump in. How many frogs were left? And the father thought about it for a second and he said, just so easy. There were 2 left. And the little boy said, no, Dad. There were 3 frogs on a limb hanging over a pool, and one decided that he was going to jump in. How many frogs were left? And the father said, oh, it's a trick question. So one jumped in and the others followed, so there were no frogs left. And the little boy said, no, Dad. There were 3 frogs on a limb over a pool. One decided to jump in. How many were left? And the dad said, I have no clue. And the little boy said, 3. He only decided to jump in. He didn't jump in. You see, that's a great analogy for Christians. We have the song that we sing. If you're a Baptist, you grew up, I have decided to follow Jesus. But do we really? Do we really? Do we really follow Jesus, or have we just decided that one day when things are convenient, things work out for us and we're able to work God into our life plan, then we'll follow him? So many times we decide to do things, but we never get them done. Teresa knows what a compulsive person I am, and I cannot stand a mess. It drives me crazy. I don't like it when things are out of order. It drives me nuts. And so we have always, since we have been married, taken Thursday night to clean the house. That's just our night to clean the house. The house is going to be cleaned on Thursday night. The boys, when they were born, they couldn't do anything on the weekend unless the house was clean on Thursday night. If it was cleaned up, they could have their friends over. But I've always been compulsive about that. But here's the deal. I could have decided that we needed to clean the house, but unless we did it, then nothing was ever really accomplished. You can decide to do a lot of things, but the question is, are you committed to doing it? And are you really going to do it? Jesus, when he says, follow me, was asking those fishermen to give up everything else. He didn't say, hey, look, tend to your business, take care of the things you need to take care of, and then if you've got time, catch up to me. No, he said, I'm standing right here, right now, and I am beckoning you. I am telling you, follow me. It wasn't a question, will you follow me? It was a command, follow me. It's an imperative. And Jesus does the same thing for us too. He doesn't stand on the sidelines and say, when you've got time, if I don't interfere with your life plan, come on. See what adventure I've got in store for you. He says, follow me. Follow me here, right now. This is the time. And I love the response. This is the exciting part for me, is whenever you hear something like this, the response from the fishermen was immediate. James and John had their dad in the boat with them. And the scripture says they didn't just leave their nets behind, they left their father behind. How hard would that be for us to do? You know, for some people, it wouldn't be so hard to leave their families behind. I don't know if you ever heard the story about Brenda Heist or not, but in 2002, Brenda was going through a really messy divorce. She and her soon-to-be ex-husband had an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old son. And one day, after she dropped them off at school, she just broke. Brenda Heist broke. She couldn't take it anymore. And she went to a park near her hometown in Pennsylvania. And according to her, 3 people came along and invited her to join them. And she did. She left everything behind. Her 8-year-old child, her 12-year-old child, any possibility of reconciliation with her husband, she left all those things behind. And 8 years later, when no one could find a trace of her anywhere, she was declared legally dead. 2 years later, she appeared in a police department in Florida. She turned herself in, basically. She just let the police department know she was alive, but all through this time she had gotten addicted to drugs and she was living life on her terms. And when the police made contact with her family, her sons, who were now in their 20s, they said, "We don't want to have anything to do with her. She abandoned us. We don't want to have anything to do with her any longer." All of her friends who had searched diligently for her, they didn't want to have anything to do with her any longer. She was living life on her own terms and had a great price to pay. I want you to know that when you live life on your own terms, when you live life your way without God involved, there is a price you will pay. It may not be right here, right now, but there is a price that you will pay for all of eternity if you decide that you are not going to follow Jesus. Jesus called those fishermen, but he calls us too. When he calls us in various ways. I had the great fortune of being with some very brave men and women earlier today. These are some of our law enforcement officers for the sheriff's office, and those people have to deal with things we could never understand. They have to deal with situations that are beyond our comprehension. They see things that we can't even imagine. And they do it why? Because they're called. Because they're called. If you're not called to do something that is that difficult, you will not last. And God calls us, and I don't care where you are, what you're doing. I don't care what your profession is. God has placed you there for a reason. He has called you to serve him where you are. You've heard that old slogan, bloom where you're planted. He calls you to bloom where you are planted. But preacher, the place I work at, all there are a bunch of cussing addicts. Maybe you're the light. Maybe you're the one who's going to show them what real hope looks like. Maybe you live in a place or you work in a place where you feel intimidated all the time. You feel as though everybody looks down on you, as though everybody's against you. I want you to know that maybe God's placed you there for a reason. Maybe that adversity is an opportunity for you to grow. And through that growth, you are able to inspire. Don't ever think that the things that happen in your life are chance or coincidence. They are not. God purposes every moment of your life. Even the bad stuff. Even the bad stuff, God allows that stuff to happen so that you will grow, so that you will persevere, so that you will mature, so that you can show the light, the way to other people. There are a lot of us who really enjoy being armchair quarterbacks. We love to call the plays from our lazy boys. We love to sit on the sidelines and say, "Oh, you messed that up. I could have done it 100 times better." There are a lot of people who do that, who have nothing but criticism for those who go and do. And the reason they criticize is because they feel so bad about themselves. So sometimes the only way a person can feel better about themselves and feel as though they are rising above the occasion is to push everybody else down. It's the only way they'll ever feel better about themselves is to find something to be critical about and push the other people down. So when somebody criticizes you, just realize that inside they're really hurting. And inside, they're grasping for straws in some way of being validated. And maybe you're the person, even though you're the one who's being criticized, maybe you're the person who could validate them by reminding them of the most important thing we could ever be reminded of. You are a child of God. Do you think your Father would want you acting this way? I know that our lives are tough. I know that we all face difficult times, but did you hear what happened in this scripture in Matthew 4? All through the land, Jesus was going into the synagogues and he was preaching the good news. Do you think that that was met with great applause? Probably not. Because when Jesus was going in and he was talking about the fact that he was the fulfillment of the law, and when he was talking about the fact that people needed to have a relationship with God rather than going through the motions of religion, do you think that that was well received? Absolutely not. People were critical of him. And then the scripture goes on and it says something else he was doing was he was going through the land and Everybody who heard about Jesus would bring their sick friends to him, expecting him to heal them. And when he did, those people would follow him. Maybe you're a sick person. I'm not saying that in jest. Maybe you literally are sick. Maybe there's some physical ailment you're going through, or maybe there's some relational sickness you're going through, or some cognitive sickness you're going through, or maybe even worse, some spiritual sickness you're going through right now. I want you to know that Jesus is ready to heal you. He's ready to make things right. Now, I want you to know when I say that, hear what I'm saying. I am not saying to you, if you have terminal cancer or some terminal illness, that all of a sudden you're going to be better. I'm not, hey, if God says it's going to get better, it's going to get better. There's nothing that God cannot do. Nothing God cannot do. What I am saying is that maybe your healing comes in a different way than you think it will. Maybe God, working through your adversity and working through the problems that you're facing right now, the sicknesses that you're having to experience, the brokenness that you're going through in your life, maybe God is healing you right now and you just don't realize it. We need to really look for where God is at work. You see, those fishermen who laid down their nets and laid down the lives that they had planned, or maybe even the lives they didn't want anymore. They laid it all down because the moment they stepped out in faith, they began to see how Jesus would heal people of their pain. And they began to see how he would transform people who were distracted and broken, fragmented in their lives. They were possessed by demons and hearing voices. And maybe in your life, you've experienced that. Maybe you've heard voices. Maybe you've felt demons tormenting you. They had seen what Jesus could do with the people who were seized up and who were living under stress. And those people who were about to break, those people who were hanging on, they were at the end of their rope. Have you ever felt that way? I'm at the end of my rope. I can't take anymore. Give me a break. We cry out. And Jesus just says, follow me. Follow you? More pressure in my life. Follow me. And you'll see. When you follow me, there's a peace that comes over you like a river. Thank you for singing that song this morning. That was beautiful. There's a peace that comes over you like a river when you follow. And when we keep our eyes above the waves, thank you for singing that song, Oceans. That's a beautiful song that reminds us that sometimes we feel like we are drowning. You've heard that expression, I'm just trying to keep my head above water. Maybe instead of you trying to tread water, maybe you ought to just reach up and let the Lord pull you out of the water. Maybe it's time for him to pull you out of your situation. Maybe it's time for you to stop worrying about things that are so worldly that they have no heavenly good. Those fishermen, when they followed Jesus, they saw what he could do with people who had been paralyzed. And maybe you're there. Maybe you're in that place in your life where you are paralyzed. You don't know whether to turn to the right or to the left. You're confused. You've got that deer in the headlight look. Which way do I go? I was driving back from the sheriff's office today, and a squirrel ran out in front of me. A squirrel ever run out in front of you when you're driving a car? They go, they're all over the road. You don't know whether to turn to the right or the left. And I just said, I'm praying for you, brother, and I kept going. I guess it was a brother. I don't know. Anyway, somehow or another, he darted through my tires. He made it. But sometimes we feel like we're doing that too, don't we? We feel like we're the squirrel in the road. And we are just darting from the right and to the left, trying to stay out of people's way and trying not to get run over and just trying to survive. And the problem is we're in the road. In the middle of the road. We don't need to be in the middle of the road, do we? We need to make up our minds. Are we going to follow? Are we going to jump in? We're going to go to the other side. If you're a Star Wars fan, you don't want to go to the dark side. Jesus calls us out of that by being the light. And he says, follow me. I'm the light of the world. I'm the one who can give life. I'm the one who can show you how to love people even when you don't think you're capable. Follow me. All of those people who listened to the voice of Jesus followed him. All of those people who took the time to let him heal them. You see what I'm saying? There's another story in the Bible where Jesus approaches somebody and he says to that person who obviously has an affliction, what do you want? What do you want? And the person says, I just want to be able to see again. I'm blind. I want to see. Well, you know what? Sometimes we don't know what we want. But Jesus says, I am exactly what you want. follow me. Today I want to invite you to come and to follow that Jesus who loves you so much, that he's willing to pull you out of the waves. He's willing to walk with you. He's willing to heal you. He's willing to give you peace in the middle of your storm. This morning, will you jump in? Will you jump in and experience that living water? We're going to stand and sing a hymn of invitation, and my prayer is that you would respond in the way God is calling you to follow him.